Hello, Bill.
Hello again, Matt.
Well, good to see you. We just had lunch last week.
We did. We think it's our 5th in-person meeting.
I think so.
This is over a 10-year span.
It feels like we see. I mean, because we talk almost every single week, and we see each other while we're talking.
Right.
We haven't always seen each other, have we? We didn't used to.
Right. Back in the ye old blogging days, when we would talk on the phone. And
oh yeah, sometimes you would be literally holding up a phone.
Yeah. Right. And we would just record the audio, not actually seeing each other.
But for the last several years, we see each other every week. It feels like we've seen each other physically numerous times, but we think maybe only 5 times.
And we were with one of our super fans.
Yes, Carrie Mickelson, which was fabulous. We had a great lunch. My wife Erin was along, of course, as well. We had a great lunch, and it was, this talk about a high level opportunity for a super fan to get not just one of us, but we've only been in the same room together 5 times. And for someone to have lunch, I don't know what the Patreon reward would be for that level.
Yeah, she got a freebie there.
And you were holding court on the 2020 Democratic primaries, and the only thing missing was our friend David Petrugia. So
an honorary DMZer.
We'll have to ship him in sometime, but it was great to see you. How was the trip overall? And you obviously made it back to Northampton.
I did make it back to Northampton. I don't always get a chance to. I see you far more than the people I work with at Politico, even though I have an actual, I get paid by Politico. I don't get paid to be here, but I don't actually get a lot of FaceTime at Politico. So I had a nice meeting with those folks and met some new people, and that was all very useful for me.
Well, I hope you set them straight. So that's great.
We have a lot to talk about as far as the politics of our fair country. We've both written Biden pieces recently, although my Biden piece was a little ahead of the curve.
Well, I think you were right. You've been very right lately about a lot of things, and I think like last week we had the big discussion about Joe Biden's campaign launch. And I was sort of down on it. I thought like talking about Charlottesville was a little bit apropos of nothing at the time. It wasn't in the news. And you were arguing that it was really that Biden had this 2-pronged approach. Mm-hmm. And I think you turned out to be right. I saw his speech not live, but I watched his speech on TV in Pittsburgh at that Union Hall. And it became very clear to me that actually this is not – I don't think we should view it as – a one-day campaign kickoff, that it's really a 2-pronged approach. And the video was checking one box and the speech in Pittsburgh was checking another box. And those are kind of equally important aspects of the Biden candidacy. And I think he got off to a really good start.
Yeah, I would add to that the challenge of, people talk about this as 2 competing theories of the case. Do you have to get white working class votes to show up or to flip them from being Trump voters? Or do you have to juice the Democrats' youthful base, juice African-American voters, juice Latino voters?
I don't like you using the word Jews there.
Juice.
Oh, you're saying juice.
Juice.
Okay. Okay. Good.
And I think what Biden's doing there is saying these aren't in conflict, because I can go to the white working class corners of America and talk about Charlottesville and talk about Trump's bigotry in a way that's not casting aspersions on you. I'm not saying you, white working class America, are racist. I'm isolating it to Trump. And saying we are all in this together. And I saw some criticism of the Charlottesville video that Biden gave, because it's very kind of Trump's an aberration. This isn't the true America, the true American spirit. And lots of folks saying, "What are you talking about? America's history is terrible. Trump is the end point of all of the horrible racism and misogyny in our country." And however true that argument is, it's not a great presidential election argument.
Yeah. Well, look, there are a lot of I don't know how many, but there are there exists out there in middle America working class white voters who voted for Barack Obama twice and then voted for Donald Trump. And if you want to win back their votes, I would suspect the way to do it is not by calling them racists and deplorables. Right. And so if Biden can find a way to say, like, you're the good, hardworking, salt of the earth people, I've got a populist message for you, but those other people over there, they're the ones.
But he's not even saying those other people. I mean, that was sort of Hillary's move, that there's a basket of deplorables, and there are other Trump voters who are good people but just are economically distressed. When she did it in that kind of blunt way, it was easy for Trump to say, she's calling all of you deplorables. Biden doesn't cast aspersion on any voter. It's all Trump. And maybe the few people in Charlottesville. I mean, that's the extent of his negativity.
That's smart, and I think he needs to really make sure that he needs to make sure that distinction is very sharp, though, because I think it's very there's a if the guy who lives in Michigan or Pennsylvania feels like Biden is calling him a racist because he voted for Trump last time, even though he voted for Obama before, that's a tough sell then to get him to vote for Biden.
I didn't see Biden do this in the past week. I saw Biden do this at the aftermath of 2016, saying flat out, these people are not racist. So I think that's really hardwired into Biden not to talk to that segment of the population in that way. And I think it's why he's leaned so heavily on communicating, your soul of the earth.
Right. Well, what's funny, Bill, is I was, we had our conversation the past week, and you were saying that there's this two-pronged approach, and I really think the way to view Biden's campaign kickoff is not as the video; it's as the video and the Pittsburgh speech together are the launch. You can't separate one from the other. The two things together are the launch. And if you heard him in Pittsburgh, he actually pretty explicitly said, my campaign is about three things. The first thing was something about like restoring the heart and soul of America, something like that, right? So that was obviously Charlottesville. Another one was about restoring the backbone of America, right? So that was obviously about Pennsylvania, working class, middle America, populist message. And then he said ending a uniter, which I think was just kind of a perfunctory throwaway, right? So like really,
I don't think that's perfunctory. I mean, I think that is sort of taken the edge off of the populist message, deliberately. I mean, that's the bipartisan message, which he leaned pretty heavily on in the run up to the announcement. I mean, there's a second video that he put out that people commented on because it's so heavy on Obama. It has extended excerpts of Obama giving Biden the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I believe there's even some reporting that Obama assented to Biden using that footage, even though he's not literally endorsing him. But in the middle of that, when Biden speaks, he speaks critically of a rise of populism and authoritarianism. He says the word populism in a negative way, and the very next sentence is about the middle class being screwed by corporations. So, I mean, he's trying to have it both ways. And you can argue he's using populism in more of a foreign policy context or white nationalist context. But I think there is an element there. And he says on many occasions that we shouldn't, even in Iowa yesterday, when he took a swipe at corporations and there was some booing, and he said, they're not all bad people. I mean, she's trying to be very clear. He's not trying to do an us versus them. Let's go storm the castle with our pitchforks. He's trying to. It's a fine line he's walking. You can even argue that it's intellectually consistent, but he's trying to make that bond with white working class America without saying the upper classes are bad and evil, that we still have to work with them and not make this a zero-sum game.
Well, so far so good. And going back to the Charlottesville thing, I mean, again, I was not a big fan of that opening video at the time, but then if you look at it, Biden puts out the video, Trump takes the bait and gets involved in a discussion over Charlottesville. So now Biden has got the news cycles continuing to talk about Biden launch video. He raises $6.3 million, I think, in the first 24 hours. That's, I think, sets a record.
Just by a bit. I mean, to not overstate, I mean, it's about what Biden, what Bernie and Beto got in the first 24 hours. It was a little bit better with less donors, as the Bernie people will mention. Bernie had the lower average total. Biden had a big, high dollar fundraiser that first day too, on top of getting a good online haul. So there's debate over how that number should be viewed.
Then you have a synagogue shooting in California, which obviously the big story is another horrible synagogue shooting, but I think it did have the effect of keeping the Biden's launch video about Charlottesville, keeping that conversation relevant. Then he goes to Pittsburgh, which I think ended up being the perfect spot because you obviously had a synagogue shooting there last October. He mentions that at the top of his speech in Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh is also obviously in Pennsylvania and a place where he can talk about his more populist message. So, for whatever, some of this was just happenstance, but he ended up having, I think, a very solid week where he had these two messages, both were resonating, and I think not only resonating but coming together in Pittsburgh. And he pulled it. He so far so good has pulled off, I think, a very solid launch.
And I think it's not just the week. I think you should look at this in terms of the last 4 months. People were sort of mocking the slow run up. And look, as right as I have been, Matt, and I've been very right.
Lately, you've been good lately. I have to give you credit.
I did not think Biden should have waited this long. I thought Biden was taking a big risk, that he would be out of the conversation. He'd be losing key staff. People would be quickly, building bonds and becoming loyal to other candidates, and he'd risk, getting in too late, like a Wesley Clark in 2004. But I think the evidence shows that he used the time well. He got some of the negative baggage.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I think the MeToo stuff that I think they probably put out to try to keep him from getting in didn't work, and the Anita Hill thing came back. It's like at some point this becomes old news. You can't keep bringing it up again, and some of this might now be behind him.
I mean, I certainly think the whole the touching controversy is behind him, and that's not his doing exactly. I mean, that was more of a blindside that he had to grapple with. Anita Hill he knew was coming. I mean, he brought that conversation back in a few weeks prior to the announcement. And you can argue that what he had to say was unsatisfactory and unsatisfying. Certainly unsatisfying to Anita Hill, and she, got right in there to step on the announcement on the day of the launch, and he had to deal with it the next day on The View. So it's not like the attempt at having a competing narrative wasn't out there, but the proof is in the pudding. His poll numbers this week are arguably the best bounce numbers we've had. I mean, I wrote a piece earlier that Kamala had the best rollout after the first month, which I think was true, and I think the one and you still can argue that Bernie had a solid rollout. He got plenty of money, and his poll numbers were solid for a good long while. But coming out at essentially the end of the announcement process, maybe there can be a couple stragglers that come in. Maybe you get de Blasio or Michael Bennett jumping in a little late. But this is effectively the end. And he is in the upper 30s with an average, I believe, 19-point lead. That doesn't mean he's going to win. I mean, polls can change.
The big number for me, Bill, and you tweeted this out yesterday, is the CNN poll that showed 50% of non-whites were supporting Joe Biden.
Right. I mean,
he's dominating. Dominating.
You do have to be careful about subsamples because all the primary samples are all pretty small. I mean, and CNN is hardly the worst. CNN's Democratic sample was 411. And I've seen primary polls under 400, even under 300 in at least one case, I believe. So once you start carving that up into, there are some folks who are out there saying they showed in the CNN crosstabs that they didn't have enough numbers to give subsample figures for people under 45, so that must mean it's a junk poll. But number one, there were two other polls, and I know the Quinnipiac poll that had Biden at 39 showed they're under 45 numbers, so it's not like CNN was some weird outlier. All the polls that came out this week had Biden in the upper 30s. And the subsampling is always going to be difficult because your samples are inherently on the low side. So you wouldn't want to take one subsample number and take it to the bank.
Sure. Because the sample size may not be big enough to once you start parsing it out,
right.
The sample size may not be big.
But all the polls we've seen have showed Biden doing quite well with African Americans and people of color and with women. So you only had the CNN poll, only 8% of people of color supporting any people of color candidate. So at least as of today, folks aren't voting. Whether it's women or whether it's people of color, they're not being tribal about it. There's definitely a heavy level of pragmatism and focus on electability, and you might argue that Biden's not going to be electable at the end of the day, but you're going to have to make that case because that's not where people are starting in this process.
I mean, I just think that's generally healthy. It's a healthy thing to see that people are not. I'm a white guy, so I'm voting for a white candidate. I'm an Asian woman, so I'm only voting for an Asian candidate. That's a horrible way to run a railroad, to run a country. So I'm glad to see that's not the case. I wonder though, wasn't it true that early on in 2008 that Hillary was doing better than Obama among African Americans?
Oh, sure.
So
definitely the African American electorate needed some proof that are you really going to go all the way here? Are you really? I mean, we have a long relationship with the Clintons. We thought Bill Clinton did a good job for us. There wasn't that same intensity of arguing about the crime bill at the time, and even that seems to be more of a sticking point with younger African Americans and older ones. And so. You really needed that Iowa win you need African Americans to say, white voters are going to vote for this guy, for them to really say, this is something historic and we need to get behind it. And then even in that case, so that was a case where, like with Jesse Jackson in '88, you had a pretty monolithic level of support for the African American candidate. But it wasn't there immediately, and it wasn't there for Al Sharpton in 2004, mind you. African Americans said this guy's not going anywhere. He did well relatively speaking with African Americans, but he didn't have literally every single vote. So there's going to have to be a lot more. Someone's going to have to take Biden down at this point. I see people recirculating. Oh, Jeb Bush was ahead, and Joe Lieberman was ahead, and John Kerry wasn't ahead at the beginning of 2004. Lieberman and Giuliani and Jeb did not have the size of lead that Biden has right now.
They also weren't two-term vice president of the last Republican or of the president of their party. I know Lieberman was on the ticket,
right?
But that's different.
There aren't a lot of data points here, but H.W. Bush, Walter Mondale, Al Gore, it's pretty common.
Dan Quayle? Oh, wait. The Dan Quayle one doesn't work.
Dan Quayle, dipped his toe in and got the heck out. So if you want to argue...
Well, plus, here's the other problem. The son of the last Republican president trumps the running mate of the last Republican president.
Quayle was a uniquely unpopular VP candidate. And Biden is not an unpopular VP. You may not like him now, but just objectively speaking, he had high poll numbers as a VP.
But what I'm saying is, if a 45-year-old Barack Obama Jr. were running,
if Michelle Obama
right now,
was running, if Michelle Obama was running,
there you go.
It would be a bit more of a complicated story, and it would
be a much more. It would be a dramatically more complicated.
And it would have been a complicated story for Biden if he ran against Hillary, because Hillary had plenty of intrinsic support, Secretary of State's not VP, but still high up in the administration. She former First Lady. That was sort of that would have been a more atypical clash.
Yeah.
This is more
now I do have to tell you,
situation.
I listened to Rush Limbaugh yesterday, as I'm prone to do. He was really going after Biden, which signals to me very threatened by Biden. And he played a mashup of Biden's Pittsburgh speech where there were a lot of like malapropisms and like hedge fund instead of hedge fund brokers and Algonquin County instead of Allegheny County. There were a lot of things like that, which makes me wonder about Biden's gaffes and Biden's age. But I do think the fact that he's running against Donald Trump probably makes it less likely that you could gain a lot of currency off of that.
Well, I potentially the age question is more dangerous than the gaffe question for Biden. I wouldn't normally say that. I mean, I feel like it's sort of baked in. Biden makes gaffes, so he gets sort of a discount. That's sort of that's just Biden being Biden, crazy Uncle Joe, and you let it slide. It feeds into an authenticity frame. I don't think Hudge instead of hedge is going to be politically fatal, but if there's something worse, if there's a worse kind of senior moment, then you might get more of a death by 1,000 cuts situation.
Well, I mean, look, I don't want to like perpetuate this kind of stuff, but I mean, Rush played this mashup. It was probably 30 seconds long of a 20-minute speech. And there were a lot of like weirdly pronounced words. I didn't notice at the time because, you're listening, you're being forgiving. We should all be forgiving listeners. I'm sure you and I make errors and mistakes all the time on this show, maybe mispronunciations or whatever, but it was a little bit jarring hearing that mashup.
Yeah, but I think it's got to be something more pronounced because you're going to see a full speech, not every full speech, but someone's going to hear a full speech. You're going to see him on the debate stage. You're going to get a more complete picture of him. And if that complete picture is, a normal guy who makes the occasional slip up, that's going to be fine. If you have a Rick Perry, number one, number two, and what's the third thing again? That's going to be a bigger deal.
Yeah. Well, I know you also have something out about Elizabeth Warren and how I think we previewed this a little bit last week, how she is the ideas candidate, but that does not necessarily bode well for her chances.
And I think we talked last week that she was getting a decent amount of buzz for having so many ideas. In fact, I actually largely written the piece before just yesterday a poll came out from Quinnipiac. The 3 polls came out this week. Only one of the 3 did you see real substantial Warren movement, but it was the one with the most recent polling sample. And it had her at 12%, which was up from 4 in a poll from a month prior. And that put her 1 point ahead of Bernie Sanders, knocking him down to 3rd place. Now, this was with Biden way ahead at 38 or 39. But it does show some seemingly legitimate Warren movement, and clearly based on her, basically weekly issuance of fresh and daring policy ideas. So you could reasonably conclude that this is a strategy that's working for her. This has gotten her off the mat and made her a bona fide second-tier candidate and not a third-tier candidate. And my buzzkill take is that's all well and good, but there have been other candidates like this in history, and they don't win at the end of the day. They don't win the nomination, at least. Their ideas may carry the day down the line.
So who are some of the quintessential ideas candidates who didn't win at the ballot box?
Well, Bruce Babbitt got a lot of media love because he famously was at one debate saying, "I'm the only person who will stand up and say he's going to raise taxes," and he literally stands up. Who will stand up with me and say they'll raise taxes? And of course, no one does. And he was for a national sales tax, which Dukakis and I believe also Gore ripped as being regressive. Jack Kemp in the '88 ran on going against prevailing wisdom in the Republican Party that deficits weren't a problem. We should embrace the gold standard. And Steve Forbes in 96 pushing the flat tax. John McCain in 2000 pushing campaign finance reform. Some people have said to me today, Hillary Clinton had ideas. It's not just having the ideas. It's having ideas that test party orthodoxy in either ideological direction. You can go, for a Democrat, you can go far left, like Bernie Sanders did. You're not cutting against the heart of the party, but you are testing the boundaries of what even liberal party members think is politically wise. Or you can go the opposite direction and cut against, party orthodoxy with, Paul Tsongas saying he's for a capital gains tax cut for long-term stockholders. Or John McCain doing campaign finance reform, which is very much outside conservative Republican orthodoxy. So in some of these cases, you push the party in your direction, as Bernie Sanders arguably has done in 2016. Your idea might even become law. John McCain got campaign finance reform signed by George W. Bush, who clearly did not want to sign that. But it's pretty hard to win the outright nomination because at the end of the day, it's about what people think is going to be viable in that general election. With some exceptions, Donald Trump was, I think, outside party orthodoxy in many ways. And I would see, Build the Wall wasn't a 10-point policy paper, but it was an idea. Build the Wall, have Mexico pay for it was an idea. And one that was not readily embraced by the entirety of his party. But that party was so divided, he won with a plurality of the primary votes. So you could envision Warren winning if the party becomes fundamentally divided. And there's some argument to that. But the long history is the ideas candidate gets the voters saying, that's nice, but, and maybe one of your better ideas, the top tier candidates just flat out steal and run with. And so you win the debate that way, but you don't become the nominee yourself. Maybe there'll be some examples like that. But I would not get my hopes up. And this doesn't mean you shouldn't vote for her or give her money. You want to see her ideas win the day, think she's the best idea, think she'd be the best president. But chances are that strategy is one where the ideas do better than the candidate, him or herself.
All right, I got two questions for you that I didn't prep you for. One, if Biden's the nominee today, who's his running mate?
As of today, I would say Kamala.
Yeah. Kamala, okay.
I think Biden certainly wants. It's going to be pretty hard for any male nominee not to pick a woman. And it's going to be pretty hard to have a white nominee not pick a person of color. And when you're talking about your traditional choices, governors and senators, you got a pretty small list to work with. That's just the reality. And Kamala, at this point, she's not. She's actually doing. Warren has taken a chunk out of Bernie and taken a chunk out of Kamala right now, at least based on that Quinnipiac poll. I mean, to have Bernie go from mid-20s down to below teens is pretty bad for him. And Kamala was generally hanging around that 8 to 10% level, and now she's getting knocked back into the 4% range. So that's not promising for her. But
I wonder how this plays on your strategy, right? If you're Bernie, you're never going to be Biden's running mate. So you have no incentive to go easy on him. Same thing with Elizabeth Warren.
Absolutely.
There's no way Biden would ever pick Elizabeth Warren as his running mate. But Kamala...
Warren can't wait to be on a debate stage with Biden and pop him between the eyes about the bankruptcy bill and just go all out.
But we saw this happen in the Republican debate where people there'd be strange bedfellows where Ted Cruz refused to say anything bad about Donald. Or I think, wasn't there a time where Ron Paul was defending Mitt Romney against Newt or something? These weird alliances form. And you could imagine a scenario where Kamala is basically running to be Biden's vice president at some point. Yeah, possibly. I don't want to diminish her chances, but
she has to know in the back of her mind that she is prime VP material. And she has very little incentive to go making enemies right now. She doesn't bring a state, being from California, but if she can help Biden with women and African Americans, I mean, Hillary's problem in 2016, like Biden, her base of support was older Democrats, more moderate Democrats, and that is actually a good place to be in a Democratic primary. I mean, the only example of a candidate in recent history not winning on the basis of older, pragmatically minded Democrats is Barack Obama, because he had the entirety of the African American vote combined with young voters and other white liberals. If you can't replicate that exact coalition, being the candidate of the youth and the left is not sufficient. There are too many older, moderate voters. So that's good for winning the primary. However, if you can't get those young left voters to show up on election day and general election day, you might have a problem, which is the problem that Hillary had. So Biden has to worry about that left flank still. And even though Bernie folks don't love Kamala, if she can help with African American turnout generally and women turnout generally, that's going to be to his advantage. And there's not a lot of other options out there for a candidate like that.
Another question I didn't prep you on, but I'm curious, guy. Just listened to the New York Times Daily podcast, The Daily, where they talked about the National Rifle Association and the weird jockeying for position between Wayne LaPierre and Oliver North, and whether this is a sign that the once thought of as being almost like omnipotent gun group might actually feel under siege right now. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I wrote a piece after Parkland that was titled "Why the NRA Always Wins," and the argument being that when these tragic shootings happen, and they are very traumatizing for the country, they're also very polarizing. They don't move the needle in people's opinions, by and large. If you were anti-guns before, you're even more anti-guns today. If you're pro-guns before, you double down on being pro-gun. And the NRA has a lot to do with that, because they pump out a lot of culture war messaging that helps you resist whatever is prevailing in the immediate aftermath of these events. So if the NRA is actually in serious trouble, and there's some reporting to that extent, there's lawsuits and obviously internal division, although I think there's been some internal division with the NRA before and they've weathered it. Wayne LaPierre is clearly the survivor of this organization. Oliver North was the newcomer, more of a newcomer. And I know there's some issues with their longtime contractors at Alexander McQueen or something like that runs their NRA TV station. So if the NRA collapses, does that mean that the political infrastructure that has propped up the gun rights minority collapses, and therefore they can't withstand a concerted gun control push in the future? Or is the gun rights culture so deeply embedded at this point that if the NRA goes down, another group just comes in and takes its place? I'm more inclined to believe the latter, quite frankly. I don't think it is. If the NRA collapses, it's not because that cultural meshing they've done didn't work. It's because they've had other internal financial issues and legal problems to worry about.
Well, that's going to be interesting to watch, because it's a great story just because for years the impression is that the NRA was like incredibly competent, incredibly professional, like ruthless. They had their act together. They had to flush with money, and we're starting to see cracks in the facade. So,
and to get this back to Biden, I mean, here's one issue where Biden is not a typical white working class male candidate. He is very anti-gun. There's no way he's going to be able to walk a moderate line or a right-wing line on guns. He has bragged about the 94 crime bill because, in part, of its assault weapons ban. In 2008, he had three, I'd say, really great debate moments in 2008, and one of them was when they were having the first YouTube.
This is with Palin. This was with Palin.
No, the primary debates. The primary debates.
Oh, okay.
The best one of all was, every sentence I really drew out of his mouth is a verb, and now a 9/11. I mean, that no one has destroyed.
Kind of true.
No one has destroyed a man's political career so succinctly in all of history. I mean, that was the where Giuliani wasn't a joke yet. He made Giuliani a joke in one sentence, which I think is truly impressive.
Well, I think Giuliani helped make Giuliani a joke too.
He was doing some damage, but people were still a little afraid to go right at him, and Biden was not. And the other one that I think was very notable was one of the first YouTube debates where there was a YouTube question, and a guy said, I want to know if you're going to protect my babies, and he whips out a couple of assault rifles. These are my babies. What are you going to do to protect them? And Biden said, and forgive me if I'm not getting this quite verbatim, and he says, you need help. I mean, he did not give that guy any sympathy whatsoever. And I don't think he has sympathy for the gun rights cause. So there's an argument that you can't win that segment of the population with the pro-gun control message. Biden, if he's the nominee, is going to test that proposition.
Very interesting. Well, you want to keep on going, or have we given the people their money's worth?
Unless you have more thoughts on Warren that you don't think I touched upon. Am I being unfair? Do you think she has more of a shot than I'm giving her credit for?
No, I don't. No, I think that she just has too many things going against her, and including the fact that she shares her space, with too many good candidates. She can't get a lane, really.
Well, if she really is eating into Bernie, I don't think you ever get Bernie to zero. There's diehard Bernie, there's no doubt about that. But if Bernie is going to languish around 10%, that's a big problem for Bernie.
Yeah.
And that actually opens up space for Warren. Warren's problem to date has been that she's been squeezed. She's not left enough for the Bernie-crats, and she's not seen as viable enough for the general for the moderate pragmatists. That limits how far she can go. And I argue probably still limits how far she can go. But if she's getting more acceptance as a second-tier candidate, and potentially the main challenger to Biden, and she's already taken shots at Biden. One thing that's a crapshoot is you don't know if she's going to be on a stage with Biden in the first two debates because you got 20 candidates that are being divvied up 10 and 10, and it's luck of the draw whether she gets to go face to face with them.
Let's talk about this for a minute. So there's two debates that have already been set and they've been decided who gets into. Is that how it works?
Not fully set, but the first two debates have the low thresholds, 1% in three polls decided by the Democrat Party, or 65,000 individual donors with, I think, a certain number coming from 20 states. And so we have a fairly good sense of who's going to be in those debates, and I think we're in the upper teens at this point, probably headed towards 20. And the Democrat Party's already said we're going to have to carve that up into over 2 nights for the first two debates, June and July, and then the thresholds will get tighter for the future.
And is that randomly done?
Yes, it won't be kids' table like the Republicans. It'll be randomly done for the first two, so you could have, maybe Andrew Yang gets that shot at Joe Biden, not Elizabeth Warren. I think it would be really dangerous is if it's more than 20. The party has said we're only going to have 20. Yes. And it'll be random who gets in. And so you might have something embarrassing like a Biden or Bernie or Warren not even getting in at all, which would be, I think, a huge problem for Democrats if that actually was the case. And maybe they're going to bring it so it doesn't happen. What's that?
They shouldn't do it random. It should be whoever was the lowest on the criteria, right?
If what's in the rules that they're currently written.
If Eric Swalwell or whatever his name is sneaks in, then too bad, you're done.
Yeah.
You're off.
Yeah, I think that would be if a serious candidate gets knocked off because they were following the letter of the law, they're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
But Warren, I think, would love to have that chance to just have it out with Biden. And I don't discount the possibility that she wins that argument. I mean, I'm not saying I put my money on it, but I can't assume she can't win it. But if she does win it, I mean, is it a situation where she takes out Biden and helps open the space for other candidates, or she takes out Biden and then supplants him as the front runner? I mean, there's a lot of history of the person going negative in debates not reaping the benefits, even if that person draws blood.
Well, remember, Chris Christie basically destroyed Marco Rubio,
right.
But it didn't really help Chris Christie.
Right, and Gebhardt took out Dean, which helped John Kerry in 2004. So, I mean, I don't think Warren has much of a choice here. I think she has to take the gamble. She has the cleanest shot at Biden, having the history with him over the bankruptcy bill. And there are people out there that still believe that Biden's support is soft, that there's still lots of room for all of these negative elements of his record to be pushed up to the fore. But the left still has an assumption that Biden is outside of the center of the party. And I think it's just as possible, if not more likely, that if Warren tries to make the bankruptcy bill the center of her attack, that a lot of Democrats are just not going to care. That they're not going to believe I don't know what Biden's going to say in this context. What he said at the time was that, Warren, you think that the government should let bankrupt folks off the hook, but that means that the creditors will be left holding the bag, and the creditors are not necessarily bad people. Warren would say these are big, giant credit card companies, screw them, and Biden's saying some of these folks are small business types that shouldn't be paying the price for someone else's problem. And Biden's arguing maybe the government should help out in some way. Maybe the government should spend money, but don't stick it to the little guy, the little small businessman or woman in that case. So I don't know if Biden can dull the attack with a counter-argument. People left might be rolling their eyes saying, come on, you were flacking for the credit card companies. But it may be that not everybody buys the argument, and that becomes not the killer argument. We'll see.
It doesn't seem like the most hot button issue to me.
I mean, it's a hot button, folks, for people who are deep into economic populism.
But those people are already voting for Elizabeth Warren, probably, right?
Or Bernie. And having that argument may end up proving that faction of the party is not the dominant faction of the party.
Will Bernie say, I don't give a damn about your damn whatever, bill?
Bernie will not say that. There is no way Bernie is going to say that.
Do we know? So we've got the first two debates are like that. Do we know? Have they said what's going to happen after those first two debates? Do we know?
I think they've indicated that the thresholds will tighten. I don't think they've said exactly what they will be. Forgive me if I've missed a memo, but I don't think they've laid it out.
As long as Andrew Yang is in, then I'm okay.
Yeah, so. I think I'm pretty sure that Yang and Williamson, and if Gravel gets in there, and Swalwell and Ryan and Moulton, these guys aren't making it to August.
Nobody's more annoying than that Swalwell guy, I have to tell you. Oh, my gosh. Anyway, another award-winning show. Fabulous.
Always a pleasure talking to you, Matt Lewis.
Yeah, man.
What do you got to plug?
Oh, wow. Well, I talked to Bruce Melman yesterday, who does these pretty regular slideshows, really basically outlining trends that are happening in America. And his latest is called The Roaring 2020s. We did a whole podcast about it. You can hear it at Matt Lewis and the News. Check that out. Also, my last couple columns of the Daily Beast, I did an interview with Andrew Yang, and I wrote a piece about Joe Biden, as you know, and his launch. So check that out at the Daily Beast.
And I have a podcast coming up soon with Michael A. Cohen, so not that Michael Cohen. His new book, Clear and Present Safety, which is all about how the world is in a much better place than people give it credit for. And a critique of what he calls threat inflation, and the threat inflation industrial complex. So fascinating discussion that should be up later this week at the
awesome network. Yeah. Is it the New Books Network, right?
New Books Network. And I got a couple more podcasts coming up soon after that, so keep an eye out.
All right. Bill, Scher, always a pleasure.
Till next week.
See ya.